The presenting sponsor of OnEducation is Participate. As longtime proponents of social learning and cross-cultural community building, Participate invites you to explore virtual exchange and student leadership as Qatar Foundation International works to build meaningful connections to the Arab world. To become a member of QFI's robust community of educators, visit participate.com/oneducation.
It seems like the one night where you would think that you could bring people together.
And thank all of your teachers for doing all of the things that they have done and are going to be willing to do this fall.
Welcome to OnEducation, part of the On Podcast Media Network. My name is Mike Washburn.
And I'm Glenn Irvin. Friends, we have an awesome pod for you today. We will discuss the President's 4th of July speech, the ways that online teaching should be different from face-to-face, and our guests this week are Jennifer Casa-Todd and Michael Hernandez.
Guests.
Plural.
2
guests. Fantastic guests.
It's exciting. It's exciting times.
Yes.
Hey, speaking of, exciting times. You were in North Dakota. Is North Dakota exciting? It must have been.
It's where my in-laws live. I wouldn't say that North Dakota is
Dakota's
exciting.
my punching bag, so I'm just, giving
I wouldn't
it to
say
them.
it's an exciting place, but it's
totally not.
Definitely a beautiful prairie land with not very many people. That's a good way to be able to describe it. With lots of farming land. It kind of reminds me of my farming simulator game. It's actually my farming simulator game in real life. It is the equivalent of it. So
North
yes.
Dakota, population Glenn's parents.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's not my parents, my in-laws, but yes. But my in-laws live there, and obviously visiting them with my kids, and we had 4th of July and their fireworks there that you could just basically fire anything you want into the sky,
Of course.
because everything is legal. So it turned out to be a good fireworks show that the town had in Jamestown, North Dakota, and then also that we were able to put on ourselves because, my goodness, you can buy some things that should probably not be used by anyone that doesn't have a pyrotechnics background, but everyday humans are allowed to blow these things up and during the 4th of July holiday.
Sure. Tons of fireworks.
Yes. Yes.
So you had a good time. You got to relax, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. It was a fantastic time. My in-laws are amazing. Like I said, I've made the comment that I enjoy them at times more than I enjoy my parents. So and that's probably not a good thing, but it's the truth.
Boy. Well, your father-in-law plays video games with you and your kids, right? That's the one who plays those. So that's like a really cool connection that you have with him. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. My father-in-law is amazing. Is probably the strangest grandfather that anyone could have. He plays more video games than my own kids do, way more than I do, and he's an expert in many games, first-person shooters all the way to farming games.
So I had the week off last week, and as predicted, I did not disconnect. In fact, I ended up spending the better part of probably 2 days worth of time working, including pumping out all the rest of the Minecraft Education Edition podcast. So they will trickle out over the next 2 months or so, I guess. But I basically pumped out 4 podcasts over the week, taking care of all the interviews and the rough edges and all of those spots and getting them all edited so that it was all done, because it had to all be done by the end of June. And I also for real, finally launched my streaming channel. So I did a lot of streaming. And
I saw you on Twitch all the time.
Yes.
You're on there for hours.
Yeah, probably too much time, to be fair. But it was a lot of fun. And I do have a bit of an announcement, if you can give me a second, because something really, really cool is happening. And this isn't just related to Twitch. In fact, it's less related to Twitch than it is, I think, to just me and something I have had an idea for a while. And that's that I've signed a partnership with a company called Nodecraft. They're a Minecraft server company. And they're giving me access to 2 servers, a survival server and a creative server. And I am going to open it up for free to educators. Frankly, anyone who wants to come and play on these servers can and should. And it will give educators a safe space to kind of learn and create and enjoy each other's company and play together. And I'm optimistic that as I grow my streaming channel and as we grow the Participate streaming channel, maybe this becomes a place where all of those folks, all of my worlds colliding on a Minecraft server, so that everyone can learn from each other and play together. So that's where I will probably, once they're all up and running, that's where I'll spend most of my streaming time. And building time is on my Minecraft servers that I'm rolling out. So super excited about that. It's not going to be, right away that those servers are going to launch, even though I have access to them right now. But we will get them rolling, and you'll know, trust me, you'll know when they're ready, because we'll make it a big deal and we'll have some fun. I have not watched Hamilton yet, and actually I think I just learned that you haven't watched it either, but I wanted to mention it because all of our teammates are just hype central about Hamilton coming out. And I think should I share it online on the podcast? I'm gonna share with you my Disney Plus channel account just in case you want to watch it. But I'm gonna try to watch it. But I love that it's out and online, and it's interesting and really interesting, the conversations about Hamilton that people have been having just about the narratives and stuff like that in this kind of time of social reckoning that we're facing. I keep using that word. I think it's appropriate to talk about like the narrative of Alexander Hamilton and in particular George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Super interesting time for Hamilton to come out and everyone to get a chance to watch it. That's for sure. Yeah. And what's funny about Hamilton, if all my Schoology peeps know this, a big part of our opening number we did this musical for Schoology Next. There's a big conference of Schoologies, and we did, myself and Jared Lopatin did a musical. Our first one that we did, and our opening number was the Alexander Hamilton opening number, the song. And what was funny about it, Mike, is I had actually never even heard that song. I had never heard it. I had never even heard of Hamilton until then. But Jared introduced me to it, and I got to listen to the actual real song many, many times to learn the rhythms and obviously the tunes of the song. And then we ended up making a parody of it with Gamify with Schoology was our opening number. And obviously the musical is a ginormous, extraordinary hit. And then putting it out on Disney Plus has also been an extraordinary big hit. And since I haven't watched it, I'm not going to be engaged in the conversation. There's a lot of conversations going on whether or not it's a historically accurate account or whether it should be a historically accurate account, whether we should be enjoying it or not, or whatever it might be, or for the reasons we should be or should not be enjoying the musical. Sure.
I will watch it because I'm kind of interested in it because I'm not usually a musical kind of person as far as enjoying that, but I think it'll be interesting. I actually enjoyed that song, the opening song, so I'm sure that the entire thing is amazing. And then maybe I'll have a better opinion, to be able to share as far as like what I actually thought of the musical itself. As far as the historical context and whatever it might be, I'll leave that to the other experts, the other pundits out there.
So you do, though, have, I think, some opinions on President Trump's speech from the 4th of July.
It's just a disaster. I mean, it was already going to be a disaster as far as him. If you've never been to Mount Rushmore,
yeah.
If any, a few episodes ago, probably last summer, actually, I described how South Dakota was a really amazing, beautiful state. And we went and we visited Mount Rushmore, among other things.
And you thought it was great.
The Badlands, and it's a beautiful place. But let me tell you about this one thing about this beautiful place. The route to get to Mount Rushmore and to leave Mount Rushmore are these windy, beautiful, mountainous roads. You wouldn't think so. And I remember I just describing it to you. People would think that South Dakota is this flat plains, whatever it might be, and it's rugged, rocky mountains, pine trees, and then obviously the Mount Rushmore monument. And I knew with 30,000 people coming to that event because of the president going to be there and speaking that was going to be not good for anything. Mm-hmm. But then what he said, as far as specifically about teachers and us, I'm going to paraphrase here, that basically we teach our kids to hate the United States. That's the paraphrase of what he said. And that's super... There's always, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, when you think that something can't actually be, an action that he does can't ever be topped. He just keeps topping it with something else. And this is just obviously not true, not even close to being true. The pride that we have as Americans for the United States is pretty huge, and the majority of our educators, I would say 99.99999% of them have that passion for our country. And one of the reasons why we can't stand some of the things that are happening within our country, and some of the things that that continue to happen, and the injustices for many people in the United States, the reasons why we are destroying monuments and so on and so forth, is because we care so much about the country. If we didn't care, we would just be complicit, to anything that was just going on. Do we teach our kids the facts? Yes. Do we make them lean in one direction? We've had this conversation before, and I always tell you, there is no left-wing agenda that happens in schools. In fact, teachers, for the most part, really do try to stay out as much as possible out of politics in their classroom.
Some teachers have to.
Yes, and then let me describe kind of what I'm trying to say here is so much so that it's maybe a little bit exaggerated, that they really don't want to converse in it. I had a really good friend that passed away, and his good friend that was a history teacher, and his best skill was basically playing devil's advocate. So it wasn't to one side or the other. What he wanted to do is make sure that kids were learning to formulate their own arguments, not the media's arguments.
Sounds
not
like
things
I'd
that
like
they
this
found
guy.
in things, not the things that they found that they heard from their parents.
Yeah.
He was saying the first step towards becoming an adult, and you are about to be an adult, is to start formulating your opinions and backing them up with some facts. And so he always played devil's advocate. It didn't matter left, right, whatever might be on the topic, and it didn't matter which class. And the kids, in the end, left the classes and always came back to him and said, I learned so much about that. And that's actually a lot of our teachers do that, is they want our kids to engage in the conversations and continue to want to seek out knowledge, obviously, but to seek out and learn what is it that they truly believe and why is it that they believe that. So they are always not just hard, and like you always describe too, Mike, I like that you say this too. You are willing to have an argument and you love the discourse of that, but you are always willing to accept too that there's a possibility that someone could change your mind on something, and it has happened, and that, and that's actually something great that we can all continue to learn throughout our entire lives, and that we don't just stay on this one point. If I was the same person when I was 16 or 17 that I am now as mid-40s, that would be really sad. That I haven't grown, as far as my opinion, my ideology, whatever it might be. And that's really what we want as educators. We want our kids to have a passion for learning, to seek out the truth, and whatever side you end up falling on, if it holds true for you because you've researched the facts and you know it is, then good for you, and you've actually done your thing. But if you're falling just complicit and you're just falling for someone's whatever rhetoric, and you're just falling, following someone just because of you feel a hate, a disgust for something, whatever it might be. And that's too often what our president currently does, is he stokes hate and fury in people and uses that to basically, as people say, to divide us, and then to also embolden people to do things that are just gross and disgusting. So this is one of those things that it doesn't surprise me, but it's so sad that it happened, and on the 4th of July to do that. It's just like, wow, thank you.
It seems like the one night where you would think that you could like bring people together.
Yes,
and as all Americans,
yes.
And like under
and
Mount Rushmore,
all of your teachers for doing all of the things that they have done and are going to be willing to do this fall.
Just went through 3 months of hell and anticipated to go through another 7-8 months of it in the fall, where they're, I was saying to my wife yesterday that I think by the election in November, like 250,000 Americans are going to die. I mean, there will be educators whose family members are dead from coronavirus. And it's like, this president can't even say thank you to them. What kind of leader is that? Is really all that I mean, it's not all I have to say, but we have 2 guests on the podcast this week, so we got to keep this train. We got to keep this train rolling. So, yes. And speaking of coming back in the fall,
yes,
Jennifer Gonzalez, who we've never had on the podcast yet.
We need her on the podcast,
and should. I've spoken to her about coming on, but the speaking of keeping trains rolling, the Jennifer Gonzalez train rolls. Yes. Very quickly. And so getting her to come on is tough. But, yes. Man, did she ever write a hell of a blog post about, online learning and online teaching, and something that everyone should read probably when going back in September.
Yes, and she interviewed another educator, a coordinator of instructional technology. Her name is Melanie Kitchen. Mm-hmm. And this blog post, and I'm not even doing hyperbole. I do some hyperbole. People know. I exaggerate some things sometimes. But this is truly one of those things that every teacher, especially every instructional leader, but every teacher out there and every administrator not only needs to read, but then needs to analyze what are the implications and how do we make these types of differences as far as different ways of being able to effectively teach online versus face-to-face, and how do we make them happen within our specific district. It basically goes down the line. A lot of these things we've actually talked about, which makes me super happy, not only in our district, but me and you have had these conversations on here on the podcast and with some of our guests, starting with things like community building, checking in, social emotional learning with our students, checking in with them and building those relationships before moving on to content. It's kind of one of the first things that they talk about. And then one of the next things, Mike, that made me super happy is that's the second kind of aspect there. They said, don't forget about your teachers too. You need to make sure that you check in with them, make sure they are good. And when we were talking to Mandy Freilich, and we were having the discussion, like, how do we keep our educators healthy in as far as emotionally healthy, and we've had these conversations on the podcast and we've had them within our school district, but this is like a point by point analysis of things that we need to do, talking about communicating effectively with our students, of course, but then again with connecting with our parents. And then there's some things on instructional design, talking about why we need to collaborate even more now than we ever have, how important that is. We talk about it as far as in social media, the connections that we make as far as in Twitter, making those effective connections within our schools and school districts, and then furthermore in the states that we live in, and then globally making those connections to make us more effective educators. And then the one part that I want to make sure that I leave here with is using that time that you do have face-to-face interactions with your students. And who are the very amazing husband and wife team? They talk about this all the time. The husband and wife team that's
Joe and Kristen.
Yes.
There's only two. There's only two. The OGs are Steve and Kathy. And then there's Joe and Kristen.
The Merrills.
The Merrills.
Yeah, the Merrills, we call them.
Hi, Merrills.
Yes, Merrills, you're amazing. And I should have just busted out your name here. But what they are for, and what they describe, and even what's inside of their book, is this concept of if you are going to have some time with your students, you might as well make that time active learning. And then it describes like, what does that actually mean to have active learning? Well, it gives you some specific examples and other blog posts linked to it of what does this look like in an online format. It is fantastic. You should not only read it, because I mean, reading is great, but we should make sure that we make the connections to how we're going to deliver our professional development. Is the first thing I'm going to bring to our administrators is, how do we make this happen at our specific districts? Because it's going to be different for everybody depending upon what your state decides to do this next fall. Fantastic read as always. Jennifer Gonzalez, you're amazing. That's all I'd say.
So, I mean, there's lots of great writing out there about what's going to happen next, and this, we can just add this to the list.
Yes.
This is the guidebook. It's funny to me that I feel like we know these things, these 9 points. It hits differently when it's written down and when you're reading it and you're letting it kind of sink in. And so we strongly advise you all go and actually read it. We'll put the blog post in the show notes. It'll go on the episode blog post as well. So you'll get a number of chances to see it from us. And hopefully you take advantage of it, because I think that there's a lot to learn there. We have 2 great interviews coming up. So when we come back, you're going to hear an interview I did with Jennifer Casa-Todd, and right after that, our interview with Michael Hernandez. So stay with us.
GoGuardian helps thousands of K-12 school districts maximize the learning potential of over 8 million students. GoGuardian's products enable productive and safe digital learning by helping educators identify learning patterns, protect students from harmful and distracting content, and support mental health. To support schools during their distance learning transition, GoGuardian is offering free access to their entire product suite until the end of the school year. To learn more about GoGuardian and download their free resources about distance learning, visit their Distance Learning Resource Center at goguardian.com/distance learning.
Welcome to another episode of OnEducation Presents. Our guest is a teacher librarian, a speaker and presenter, and the author of Social Leadia, Moving Students from Digital Citizenship to Digital Leadership. Welcome to the podcast from just 30 minutes or so down the road from me, Jennifer Casa-Todd.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Super excited for you to be here with us. The school year just wrapped up in Ontario. This is the first week off for everyone in Ontario. How have the last 3 or 4 months been for you? I'm curious what your teaching looked like.
So absolutely, though I'm a glutton for punishment and I'm teaching summer school. So I'm quickly trying to prepare for that, which starts on Thursday. But here as a teacher librarian, slightly different in terms of the way I worked to support teachers. For the most part, my job is to co-plan, co-teach, and co-assess with teachers. And that was mostly physically in my library classroom. And so the shift to online was interesting because I didn't know what it would look like. But thankfully, I was able to forge really positive relationships with my teachers. And so I was able to continue much of the work that we had started during the school year. So with a couple of my classes, we were working on TED Talks. And so I was able to assume that co-teaching, co-planning, and co-assessing of the TED Talks. We're in TED Ed clubs. One of my teachers continued to work on podcasting along with me. And so that was great. And that's what that aspect looked like. But I found myself as the resource person in my building, quote unquote, also really trying to help support teachers who weren't quite as far as proficient, let's put it that way, with technology tools, who are now forced to choose an LMS or choose a way to communicate with kids, who were now forced to meet synchronously with our kids. Our school board did something a little different than some other people, I think, in that we had created a schedule. Elementary school students connected with their teachers in the mornings. Secondary school teachers connected with their classes at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Period 1 on Monday, period 2 on Tuesday, period 3 on Wednesday, period 4 on Thursday, with Friday as a catch-up day. In addition to that, what I, as a teacher librarian, I was able to create a resource for teachers at my school, subject specific, which gave them access to textbooks, things that, again, were so unique to COVID times. I created video tutorials. I helped support teachers as they connected. Teachers were really interested in copyright, more so than they ever had been before. So that was really my role, to support teachers. And I was just so amazed by them. You know, teachers who had never, ever connected on a Google Meet before. You know, for me, I did that all the time. But some of these teachers, they were incredible troopers and learned. So the one teacher said to me, my goodness, Jennifer, like, I learned more in these past 3 months than I probably have in 6 years, you know, when it comes to technology. So I was grateful to be a support, and it really, really brought home the fact that, you know, I don't know what those schools were doing who didn't have a resource person like me, you know, a teacher librarian in the school.
So there's two things that are interesting to pull out there. The first one that comes to mind is we have a lot of, I mean, most of our listeners are American, and so it's fun. Sometimes I get to educate our American listeners on, you know, the Canadian education system and Ontario education system, which is always really great. And most teacher librarians in Canada are also like the main technology teacher. And in most schools in Ontario, the only computers that are like stationary are in the library, in a lot of cases anyways. I mean, there are carts and stuff now, but the teacher librarian ends up being, in a lot of cases, the primary source of coding education, for example, robotics in the classroom. This is all stuff that you do, I know. Talk a little bit more to me about, you know, how much effort you had to put into assisting teachers with that piece of them learning and wrapping their head around all of the change and all of the new software and tools, Blackboard and or Brightspace that they had to learn, right? Tons of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I found, you know, people are like, online, this is awesome. I probably worked harder. And, you know, the lines between being at work and not being at work were so blurred, right? Because when you had a teacher in distress who's like, my kids are trying to upload this and it's not working, or I want to create a video, but this, you know, how do I do this? Or I'm a math teacher, and how could I use a whiteboard? And, you know, and there were even some digital citizenship pieces, right? Like a teacher who had kids trying to enter their room with, you know, inappropriate names. You know, they made up emails. And so what I have been, you know, harping about for years in terms of digital leadership and co-constructing norms with kids became very, very prevalent in the work that I was doing. And so, yeah, no, absolutely. That was one of the areas of focus. I think another one was definitely research, right? Because we have these incredible databases at our school, and we know kids default to Google so often. But it was nice even to see kids, especially I work with students in the extended essay program through IB, really, really taking another look at credible resources practices and what those look like.
So I'm sure, I mean, we've just started the summer, but I suspect you, like a lot of teachers, are already thinking about, well, what the hell am I going to do next year? When no one really knows, like it's crazy, and every place is like totally different. I mean, in Nova Scotia and the Maritime provinces, they've opened up almost fully. I mean, there's been no cases of coronavirus in Nova Scotia or in PEI for like 18 weeks or something like that. So lots of positivity in some places in the country, and in other places in the country, it's a bit more of a struggle, and then definitely a struggle in the United States. So it's a little bit different everywhere. I'm curious what you think your classroom might look like for you next year.
I have no idea. I know that our Minister of Education has said to school boards, you have one of three options. It can be an in-person thing, it can be a hybrid situation, or it can be completely online. And I know my husband, who's an administrator, has been toying with, my goodness, what does that schedule look like? I think, honestly, I'm so heartened by the proficiency that I've seen in terms of teachers and their ability to use digital tools, and also their resiliency. And I think at the end of the day, no matter what it looks like, I think, because we have no idea, like it literally can be anything, but I think that our attitude towards what that looks like needs to change. And I think what we need to really focus on is, and it's the subject of one of my blog posts, like when we look at, is it synchronous, is it asynchronous? The question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we best ensure that we develop relationships with our kids online or in person? Like, relationships are at the heart of this. And then how can we support different learners in different ways, whether that, for the first time, some of my teachers have discovered hyperdocs, right? Or, the advantages to having a video in addition to your in-person instruction, so that kids who need it could go back and rewind. So I would say, no matter what it looks like, being able to pick from some of the really successful practices that we learned or engaged in this past year. Some of them need to be thrown away, but others of them could really help build and sustain community, gap closing, and relationships.
The last 4 to 5 years have been crazy, but it's like 2020 is like the boss fight of crazy years or something like that. It's exceeded all expectations of craziness. I said to Jed Dearyberry on last week's podcast that, if one crisis wasn't enough, we are definitely dealing with plural crises at the moment. Between the pandemic, and there's definitely a social reckoning occurring in the United States and also in Canada around Black Lives Matter and police brutality. And then there's an election coming up in the United States. And listen, if you thought the 2016 election was crazy, I mean, strap in, friends, because we're about to get nuts. And I have thought about you so often and the work that you do and what you teach and talk about. I think about it all the time, because it's like, how in the world are we going to, I don't want to use, my first word was protect, but I feel like we also just need to inform and educate our kids about what it means to live in a world that is this nuts and this divisive and so like split along like partisan lines. And now it's like wearing a mask is something that is like, you're right if you don't wear masks because you believe in freedom, and left if you wear masks just because you're trying not to die or whatever. This has got to be the most important time in our lives for students to understand life online, right?
Absolutely. And so it's so interesting that you say that. I mean, my friend Mandy Froelich said the other day, like, social media was way before its time. And I think people right now are ready for this message. Because one of the things I've been advocating for many, many years is the extent to which technology, and especially social media, connects us to other people, and how important it is for us to model leadership, right? And what that looks like online. We need that now more than ever. It also, I mean, certainly one of the things that I've spoken about for many, many years is the fact that social media can either create a bubble for you, or it can interrupt your narrative with an alternative perspective, right? And so, you know, I'm looking at my own social media feed to wonder about whether or not I'm hearing from the same people, from the same background as me, from the same color as me, or whether or not I truly have diverse voices in my social media feed. And I think that's an important conversation to have. It also, right now is, you know, I talk a lot about critical literacy in social media, and certainly in my work every day as a teacher librarian, I'm working on something like that for summer school right now. This idea of whose voice is missing, who has the power, what does that omission of that voice mean to the message? And certainly media literacy, right? You know, that media is a construct, and that, you know, there's a purpose and an audience, and it has special interests. And so unpacking what those interests are, like every time you see something online, you need to ask yourself lots of critical questions. And we're not doing that enough. And we're definitely not modeling. Some of the research I did in my own master's, for my own master's thesis, was the extent to which modeling is so important. When you, you know, and some of all of the positive effects that I was able to see through the Global Ed Student Chat, which is what I took a deep dive into, showed that when we show kids something different, they actually do, like, when they experience something different, they're actually, their behaviors change. And so we really, really, really need to focus on those conversations and those lessons in our classes. I always wonder, you know, I was just talking to my husband about that this morning, like, we have so many incredible opportunities in our language arts and our English classes in that media strand, right? That is part of what every student needs to know and understand and be able to do by the end of whatever. And I don't feel like we tackle these questions enough. We continue to do the same old things that we always have for media. And we definitely need to change that, because this is a different world into which these students are graduating.
So in that whole vein of partisanship in particular, it can become tricky just to even address the nature of social media as an educator and appear partisan, appear like you're trying to influence your students one way or the other. And I imagine that there are a lot of educators out there, especially our American friends, who are trying to tackle in their heads how they're going to inform their students and talk to their students about fake news, and that, you know, they have a president that is the paragon of fake news, yet not appear to be like pushing their kids to be anti-Trump or anything like that, you know, in the fear of getting in trouble with their district or with their supervisors. I'm wondering if you've spent any time thinking about how teachers can actually model this for their students in their classes, or discuss it with their students in their classes, especially under that weight of being afraid.
For sure. So one of the things that I totally agree, I think we have to acknowledge that there are some difficult lines that we can engage in as teachers, and we have to acknowledge that we would have a bias. And I think it's important for kids to know that everyone has a bias, right? That you come at everything based on your own experiences, and kids need to know that. Those are the essential conversations that we need to have. I think that the way I've always approached it, it's the way I have approached it in social media. My upcoming book, Raising Digital Leaders, which is for parents, also addresses this from a parent perspective. But when you take a look at the media triangle, right, and you look at the fundamental concepts of media, and these were true when I started teaching 24 years ago? My goodness, I'm old. But that media constructs reality, that audiences negotiate meaning, that media has economic implications, that they can communicate value messages, that the form and content are related, and that every media platform has its own forms and conventions. When you look at the media triangle, you can apply that to a Facebook post, to a blog post, to a newspaper article, to a Twitter post, to a Snap, to a TikTok, right? No matter what the medium, you could take those same questions and have kids answer those questions for themselves. And the more they begin to unpack media as a construct in this way and ask questions of what they're seeing, the better able they will be able to understand some of those nuances. Is that always going to be perfect? No. But I want my students to be skeptical of everything that they see. I want them to bring those questions. I want my kids to do that, right? I want them to bring those questions to everything that they are seeing. And the more that we do that, I think the more effectively we can construct media, but also the more we consume, the more we understand what it is that we're consuming.
Jennifer, how can folks learn more about your work, connect with you on social media, buy this great book that everybody should definitely read now? If they weren't reading it before, I mean, man, oh man, open that up and learn how to talk to your students about social media, because we're entering the golden age of necessity for this, for sure. How can people reach out and connect with you?
Absolutely. So I blog at Casa-Todd.com. I try to blog every Sunday. And that's where you can also connect with me on social media. So on Instagram, I'm at Casa-Todd, as well as Twitter at Casa-Todd. I have a Facebook page for social media. And then if you go to Casa-Todd.com, you'll learn more about my upcoming book, Raising Digital Leaders for Parents, which is coming out this summer, published by Dave Burgess Consulting, and my children's book, which I've co-authored with Lee Castle, Aubrey Bright, Stories That Connect Us, which takes that same idea of connection through technology, but it's through the lens of a young girl and her relationship with her grandmother and her friends. And I'm excited that that's coming out through EduMatch in the summer as well. So you can find out more about both of those projects at Casa-Todd.com.
Awesome. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes for folks as well. Jennifer Casa-Todd, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Have an amazing day.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Our guest this week is an educator, author, and consultant. He's the host of the Change the Narrative podcast. And if you're building a list of great educators in the world of content creation, his name is definitely on this very short list. Welcome to the podcast, Michael Hernandez.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Michael, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, why it's important, and what brought you to us here today.
Oh, gosh. Well, my day job is that I'm a high school teacher in the Los Angeles area. I teach broadcast journalism, film production, and photography. So I just finished my 21st year teaching those classes, and it's been really great. It's always changing. It's always new. So it keeps me on my toes. And I guess what I really like most about teaching those classes, I mean, there's a lot of things, is that the students get to create work that matters to the world, to people outside of the classroom. And I feel like, especially now that we're on pandemic and everyone's on remote learning, a lot of the kids are wondering, like, what's the point of all this? What are we here to do? And so it's really great that we can facilitate that for the kids. And, just integrating creativity into their daily routine, because they don't have that anywhere else. It's just really difficult to find those creative skills and the creative mindset being developed in other courses because of the demands of, standardized tests and, rushing through all this content that the teachers have to do. So it's great to be able to provide that respite for them as well. So that's what I do during the day. I love it a lot. The kids are fantastic and ridiculous and keep me on my toes. I learn a lot from them too, which is, I guess, maybe the most fun part of the job, I think. And then I do a little bit of consulting on the side. I do some writing and work with some tech companies and speak at conferences like South by Southwest and ISTE. And again, that's really great for me because I get to network and meet really creative folks like yourself that inspire me. And, I get to keep learning too. So that's a lot of fun. So I guess that's kind of my job in a nutshell.
Nice. That's awesome. I was thinking in Ontario, Canada, where I am, there's actually not many high schools anymore that have like broadcast journalism or like even like yearbook like class, like which used to be a thing when I was growing up. I don't know if that's showing my age or not, but or things like cinematography and photography. Those classes don't really even exist in a lot of high schools anymore. It must feel special that you are still able to do this after all this time and in, again, an age of standardized tests and stuff like that.
Yeah, it is really rare. And so it kind of forced me to reach out to colleagues globally that are in different places of the world, in the US, Canada, Australia, Germany, like all these different places, which I think is really, we should all be doing that. But as far as like these skills and these mindsets, I think it's a double-edged sword because it's not tested. And when something's not tested, the schools aren't going to put any money or effort into backing those up. But the advantage to that is that it's not tested. And so we can do whatever we want and pivot and change and adapt on a dime. Like I'll just change curriculum like that day. Like I'll hear a news report. Like, like the last several months, it's like something new happens every single day. And we need to be able to be nimble with our curriculum and make our lessons, our projects, the experiences for the kids relevant to their lives right now. And so I think, the standardized tests and textbook adoption process takes years, if not decades, to change. And that just makes us as teachers irrelevant. So that's, I guess, what I really like and think is so important about this. I know we have these conversations about media literacy and what that means. And some people default to this term digital native, like the kids know how to use this. They don't. That's just an excuse for us to not have to deal with it. And so that means being able to analyze images, create content, and understand how these messages are crafted and how they can fool us. And it's obviously in this country, in the United States, and also in other places of the world, really, really important right now because that's how we get our information about the world, how to make choices about our lives, like, do I believe in science? Do I believe in COVID? Should I wear a mask? Who should I vote for? Right? All of these really fundamental questions and fundamental issues that underlie society and why we're not helping kids to become literate is a huge question that I have. And literacy means digital literacy, and it means visual literacy, and it means filmmaking, and it means social media authoring and all of these things. So I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I just wish that all of those skills could be integrated into other courses. It doesn't necessarily have to be a standalone film class. Yeah. Or like students don't see themselves as like a journalist. I'm not going to do that in my life, but the journalistic mindset of research and going to primary sources and questioning everything and verifying with observation. I mean, it's like science. And so I think more teachers should be doing this, integrating it into all of their subject areas, social studies, English language arts, everything. There's no reason that we can't because you can do everything on your iPhone right now anyway. Yeah,
totally. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately, mostly because like it intersects with my job. I'm a creative person just like you, and Glenn is as well. And doing a lot of content creation, I'm doing a lot of streaming and obviously podcasting and a bunch of other things. And I'm thinking about also all of these people that I've seen really emerge over the last few months in this space of content creation and conflicted about kind of creativity in this age of crisis. I mean, our last podcast episode, we spoke to Jed Dearyberry, who is a very creative and, has written a book about it, in fact. And I said, it's plural now. We have multiple crises going on all around us. Basically, we're surrounded by them. Yet you have certain maybe content creators that are flourishing in this time and doing incredible work. And I'm curious about reconciling, I guess, those two kind of pieces and just what you think about what it means to be creative right now and what it means to maybe be creative in the midst of, everything that's going on around us right now, which is absolutely insane and about to get crazier with an American election coming up.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different questions in that question.
That's the way I do it, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so first of all, what is creativity? Which I believe is not necessarily art. It's more of a mindset of being able to pivot, being able to adapt, to question, to iterate and improvise. That's what creativity is to me. And it's not, there's sort of this myth that you're sort of born a creative person. And if you're not born a creative person, then it's just forget it. But I don't think so. I think that's more of like, yes, there are some innate traits that someone might have, but I think there are skills and mindsets that can be developed and honed that everybody needs. So when you think about people are talking about creative solutions to COVID or creative solutions to racism or creative solutions to like remote learning, what does that mean? And they don't mean we're going to sit around painting, right? It means that we're going to try to develop something new that we didn't have before to solve a problem that's in front of us with the tools that we have available to us. And that's what creativity is. And so your second part of that question is, how do we use that now? Well, clearly we've got problems to solve, right? But also the other side of that, which is the art side. And so maybe your question is more philosophical, like we saw lots of questions after the Holocaust of like, how can we create art after the Holocaust or something like 9/11 or something like that? When there's tragedy in the world and people are suffering and things like that. And I think it's really important to do it. And what I noticed with my students as we were going through, lockdown, as we were going through quarantine, they were teenagers unable to be teenagers. They couldn't hang out with their friends. The routine is thrown off. Everything has changed and they were really struggling and they really were hungry for art. They were hungry to do photography and filmmaking because it was something that you had control over. And when life is out of control, I think you need to make stuff. Like I learned to bake bread. I'm like the cliche, right? I've got sourdough bread like right now in my kitchen, like festering, like feeding it, whatever. But it gives you like a sense of control. So there's a consistency to it. But also I think you get to process all of those emotional and psychological issues that you have, whether it's like just in your own head or with your family or struggling with school or your health. I really think that we can work out our issues by making things and creating. It's not, in some ways it can be a selfish act because just like you would, do anything on your own, like write a letter or something like that. But I think at the same time, it can be a very constructive and helpful activity because you don't make art to throw in a drawer, you make it to show someone. And when you show people, like I had my students do these series of ebooks inspired by a New York Times series, Quarantine Life, and so they would document their lives and what was around them and what they were doing during the day. And so when they shared those with each other, they got to see there was a sense of commonality, of shared purpose, of shared suffering, so to feel not alone in the world, I think is maybe one of the reasons we create art. And I think, we see that happening again right now because we're alone. We can't go to school. We can't go to bars and restaurants. You can't see your family. And so it functions in all of those ways, both on a technical skill level kind of thing and also on a social emotional wellness level, which everyone is starting to really focus on right now. So I think it's really important.
So Michael, I was just thinking you're a high school instructor, and I've worked with high school teachers either as a high school teacher or with high school teachers now as an instructional coach. And one of the things that I have seen throughout my entire career, even until now, is the continual lack of the interest in funding arts, number one, as far as within schools and school districts, and how little focus it actually gets as far as budgetary focus. But then something else now that's actually come into play, this hyper focus on reading and math scores, as you had described earlier, as far as testing, has led us down this path of basically regurgitating information. And then now during this crisis time where we have to do this kind of online teaching, we have found out that the regurgitation of information is really not, we really don't want that. And then so how are we going to, for example, assess students, in a summative way on anything that we are describing? And one of the, I guess, positive aspects as far as this crisis, one of the things we could take away from it is what you were describing. And maybe you can tell us more about this, is that ability for students to go ahead and create something and tell a story to describe what they've actually learned versus just spitting out information on a, multiple choice exam, and how really we can learn so much from our art teachers, our art instructors in the variety of the different arts, whether it be music or art, or in the case of your specifics. What can we take away from all of that? As far as all of us that are just teaching, the content, the core.
Oh my gosh. I was just reading this article in The Atlantic the other day, and it was talking about math. We need to move away from this idea of making kids calculate to a mindset of like, how are we going to use this information? So instead of focusing on the skills of solving equations, because that's automated, you have computers that can do that.
Yes.
And much faster. So instead of focusing on those types of rote skills that are easily automated, instead, let's focus our energy on things that we can do with that information. And so, again, it's this whole thing that I guess schools have gotten into, where it's difficult to measure and assess kids if it's messy and it's, not a number. And so your administrator's talking about data,
Yes.
We need data.
Like, data meetings.
Let's have the data on you. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. How good of an administrator are you? What's the data, right? And so I really think that I've thought this for a while, is you have to shift away from, again, the rote memorization, and you have to move towards like the content isn't the central piece. It's like what you are able to do with that information. How are you able to constructively impact the world, in positive ways? And I think that's where a lot of teachers were struggling on remote learning, mm-hmm. honestly, is they're used to being the center of the room and the font of information. Like I'm still at my school. I'm in Southern California, US, like a well-resourced school. Teachers are still lecturing. Mm-hmm. It's like, what are you doing? Like, or they would go on Zoom and they just like filibuster the kids. Mm-hmm. They just like lecture for hours. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you can record that.
Terrible.
They can consume it whenever they need to. What's best for them. Rewind it. Play it again, listen to it again. Oh, now I get it, right? And instead, you can use your valuable, magical face-to-face time to have conversations, to collaborate, and to do something productive with that. And I think that's, I think we all want that. Like, think of us as teachers. We go to professional development or a faculty meeting, and we're just like looking at our phones because this is a waste of time. Yes. Right? Like, give me something that I can do that's going to be productive. And for most of us, that means going back to our classrooms and doing something cool, right?
Yes.
But again, sort of this existential piece that I really believe in. I wrote a Medium article a few years ago when Donald Trump got elected. And it was like, part of, I think, the mindset that leads to, what's the right, not too political way to phrase this? Like, when you have dictatorial tendencies in leadership, it can stem from this mindset that we've developed in the classroom, which is, very prison-like. It's like, we'll tell you when you're going to eat. We're going to tell you when you can go to the bathroom. You're going to sit in that chair for an hour. The bell will ring and you'll move to the next cell.
Yeah.
And if you get the answer wrong, you're going to get punished. Right? And then we wonder where we have classroom management issues. Like, why are kids distracted on their phones? Well, are you distracted on your phone in the faculty meeting?
Often.
And again, the question of like relevance. And teachers are thrust into that right now. It's like we're questioning our relevance. And you can go one of two ways. You can either like freak out and go, oh my God, I'm outsourced because the kids are on Khan Academy. And they can find the videos of how to solve the math equations on YouTube, right? And you can go, I have no reason, no purpose as a professional. Or you can say, you can embrace that and go, okay, right on. Somebody else is handling that for me. Or in my department, we've developed these cool videos to offload all of that direct instruction. And now we get to the fun stuff, which is thinking and problem solving, and coming up with solutions to problems in our real world. And I don't know about you, but I can't stand like grading essay after essay or like, I don't know, like standardized tests. That's not fun for anybody, not even the teachers. No. Like we've lost the joy in education because we've turned it into numbers and data. And there's so many kids that we're forced to see every day and every year that it makes it really difficult to do that meaningful face-to-face interpersonal kind of coaching that we should be doing as teachers to help them build these projects. So it's not teachers' faults per se. I think it's everyone's fault. I think it's system. Parents who feed into that. Like, we got to get my kids into the best college, so I got to get these like AP scores up, and then the money comes that way. And then you have the education industrial complex that won't let that system fail, right? Exactly. It's too big to fail. And, then the kids wonder, like, what do I do now? I'm working for a grade and now I don't work for a grade. So what am I doing?
What's my purpose? Yes.
I'm rambling now, but stop.
No, it's great. We love it. That's exactly what we're thinking of. So multiple things going on right now, an election coming up, George Floyd, and definitely a reckoning as far as race goes in America, a global health pandemic, and you and Glenn and I, frankly, and a bunch of other people that we know and respect, all have these like fairly large platforms by which to communicate with educators and speak our minds and share what we're feeling, as a group where, so OnEducation has we have a team of folks that we work with, that we love, and we kind of worked together on putting out a statement. It was written under my name, but I definitely got insight into it, and we have these kind of ideas on how we move forward as a team during this time, and using our platform for change and to help change by doing some specific things. And I'm wondering if you've thought about your platform. I watch what you tweet all the time. I respect you quite a bit, and I think that you have a great opportunity, just like I think we do, to have our voices heard. And I'm curious if you've spent some time thinking about what you're going to do in light of multiple crises that are surrounding us with this great platform that you have.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, personally, I try to use my platform just to share ideas that I think would be useful to other people, and or inspiring or thought-provoking and challenging. Maybe it's just my personality. I'm not so much like a high five, like social media high five kind of person, which, has its place. But I feel like a lot of educators are kind of not sure what to do or say, and rightly so. I've got a lot of, white friends who are educators and have huge platforms, much bigger than mine, and haven't really said much. And I reached out to them, and they're like, I don't know that it's my place. I don't think that I have like something to say that's going to be relevant. And I think in some ways that's good, because there are clearly a lot of voices, information, and facts that we haven't heard. So there's that piece to it. And then the other part to it is, I think that everybody is obligated to stand up and do something that they know is right. And I think a lot of times, whether you have a so-called platform or not, whether your platform is just your classroom, or it's your school or your family, your friend network, to stand up and say, that's not right. or I don't know what to do, but I know something has to happen. Who's with me? Let's figure this out. And I think there's so many people, I get the feeling, maybe I'm making assumptions, but I get the feeling that a lot of times people are just afraid to, well, of course, afraid to rock the apple cart, or offend somebody. And, when Donald Trump was being elected, it was the same thing. It's like, well, I don't want to have a political conversation because I don't want to piss anybody off. And it's like, why are you so fragile that you can't have an intellectual conversation about facts? Aren't we educators? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Aren't we supposed to talk about facts, like how to find verifiable, reliable facts and make decisions based on fact? Whether you're analyzing literature or studying history or doing science or creating art, that's our job. And so we often hear this too. And I hear this at my school, don't be political. Like, you're not supposed to be political in the classroom. Well, kids are looking to you for advice and direction because they're wondering, they need it. They hear different things from their friends or from their parents that may or may not be accurate. I think this idea of politicizing things, you could definitely be like, over the top, but I think having a conversation about facts and making a space that's safe for conversations, respectful, professional conversations is important, because not only are there the facts that need to be discussed, but also we need to model that behavior for our students. So again, it's all these like sort of under the hood, invisible things that we teach every day, is like how to have a civil conversation, and I don't know that a Socratic seminar does that, because the loudest person gets heard. And that's exactly the problem right now, is that the loudest people, and maybe the loudest people are us, with these megaphones. Like, how do we bring in these other voices? How do we elevate? How do we highlight? And I think if you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, ask. Reach out to people who you haven't talked to, people of color, of other underrepresented groups. Have them as guests on your show, right? Yes. Or, ask them or quote them on your Twitter account, or invite them to be part of your, you have to be careful though, because you don't want to be like, oh, this person we brought in because they're our token Black person and they're going to like speak for all Black people. Exactly. You don't want to do that. But what I mean is like, how can we educate ourselves?
Yes.
So it's so complicated and so tricky. I mean, share the literature that you're reading. Like, there's so many suggestions for those kinds of books. And that's what I try to put out on my Twitter account and Instagram account are, these great books that are out there that get your mind thinking, or resources from, the Southern Poverty Law Center, for example, that can really be helpful in your classroom and also with yourself. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but
no, you are.
It's definitely, I think if everybody just has that mindset that it's okay to not be right, and if we try to separate ego from the facts, I think we'll all be a lot better off. And I think it's okay if people don't know what to do or say. It's not seen as like, well, you're shirking your responsibility, but at some point we do need to like call BS on whoever, and make it right. And this is an example. This kind of ties into what we were just talking about as far as relevance. Is a good friend of mine is an art teacher, a really fantastic art teacher in the San Diego area, and she's got this fantastic website. Her name is Valerie White, and you can look up her stuff. She created resources for monuments, because there's all this toppling of monuments of like Confederate soldiers and all of these people that are controversial, like Christopher Columbus and things like that. And so she's like, okay, I got to make my curriculum relevant. Like, what is a monument, and what makes one monument better than another? And the difference between celebrating a racist and a monument to an event or a happening or something like that, like we see. So that was a really great way to tie in art into social studies and things that are happening in the contemporary world. So in her own way, she was able to do that and start to address that in her classroom, which I thought was really brilliant. And I'm going to steal that idea.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So, Michael, you were just describing, you share resources both on Twitter and Instagram. Can you if our audience wants to connect with you, can you share the way to be able to do that?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at Cinehead, CINEHEAD. And you can find me on Instagram at changing.the.narrative.
Nice.
Michael Hernandez, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glenn Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the On Podcast Media Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Monica Burns, Mike Matera, Tisha Richmond, and many more by visiting onpodcastmedia.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at OnEducationPod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found on Twitter at IrvSpanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/OnEducationPod. We're also on Instagram at OnEducationPod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. When you leave a rating, it gives our podcast rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Participate, for supporting us. Check out participate.com to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening. Stay awesome and see you soon.